Good evening, everyone. My name is Sai Aditya Pradeep, and I'm the Scientific Program Manager for the AIM EFRC Center. Today, we are sort of inaugurating our outreach webinar series on 21st century skills. And this is part of an ongoing series. So it's the sixth talk, and we are going to focus on the considerate leadership topic with a focus on ethics, physiological safety, and listening. So this particular talk is co-sponsored by three different entities. We have the AIM for Composites, EFRC, the Center for Plastics Innovation, and the IDEAS NSF NRT. So before we begin, a small precursor into what we are. So the mission of the Artificially Intelligent Manufacturing Paradigm for Composites, or the AIM-EFRC, is to build an AI-enabled inverse design approach for fundamental understanding and integrated material manufacturing design of advanced polymer composites. The mission for the Center for Plastics Innovation is to develop energy efficient, selective, and tolerant chemo and biocatalytic and synthetic pathways to valorize diverse plastic waste streams and dramatically increase circularity across the plastics life cycle. And lastly, the IDEA's NSF NRT traineeship focuses on training the next generation of STEM students to develop expertise across multiple disciplines, specializing in AI enabled inverse design for advanced composites and sustainable manufacturing. Today's talk, as mentioned, is focused on imparting key 21st century skills as identified by the National Academies Press. So we're currently in our season 2. The current series will feature talks focused on skills, including critical thinking, problem solving, analysis, reasoning, decision making, adaptive learning, information literacy, oral and written communication, as well as active listening, all of which are essential for navigating the complexities of today's research and development landscape. Our previous series, which is available on YouTube, featured talks focused on career paths in national labs, industry, and consulting. And with that, I would like the director of AIM EFRC and IDEAS NRT to introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Sai. First of all, welcome everyone. And I know it's a bit very late, but Happy New Year. It's the first time we are meeting in this new year. So today it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce a fellow colleague of University of Delaware, Professor Kyle Emick. Professor Emick. So Professor Emick did his PhD from Cornell, and he's a professor of business administration at the University of Delaware's Lerner College of Business and Economics. His research explores the role of individual attributes, particularly perceptions and emotions, in multi-level systems. He has published widely. Key among them are Academy of Management Journal and Psychological Science and media outlets, including Time as well as Time Magazine as well as New York Times. So this, as Dr. Pradeep pointed out, this is an ongoing series where we try to reach out to the community with different perspectives on 21st century professional skills. And this is the first webinar where we are actually collaborating with our another EFRC, which is also housed at University of Delaware, the Center for Plastics Innovation. So thanks to the team of CPI for joining us, as well as we're also collaborating with another program funded by the National Science Foundation, the IDEAS Composites. It's an NRT program. So with that, thank you so much, Professor Emick, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So thanks for allowing me to come here. I'm glad we have so many attendees. And I'd also like to say that I'm really happy that the CPI and other agencies are really interested in starting to recognize that these softer social skills are actually really important to running labs. So what I teach at the University of Delaware is leadership in teams. So teams are obviously a key component of what you guys are doing. Most labs involve multiple individuals coming together and combining their skills. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of how to make that more effective. Originally, we were going to try to fit a bunch of topics into this presentation, but we ultimately decided that we only have about 45 minutes. It's better to drill deep down into a topic. So we're going to talk about a topic that is often ignored, both in teams and in business school, and that is listening. So just to get started here, I want to take a little bit of a step back and think about what do we mean when we talk about leadership? And what we mean when we talk about leadership is what you're trying to do is you're trying to influence people, as it says here, to work together to accomplish a common goal. Now, the reason I want to lay this definition out for you is that it's easy to see once you view it like this, that anyone on a team can be a leader. It doesn't have to be the formal person who's in charge, your PI or your manager or whatever it is. Leadership can come from anywhere, as long as someone is trying to influence the people that are working together to accomplish a key goal. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. And what I find is more effective in these talks is if we can try to personalize it, if we can try to make it effective for you. So what I want you to do here at the beginning of the talk is I want you to try to think about 2 challenges that you're dealing with right now in your organization or your team. And then what I want you to do as we're talking through this is thinking about how can listening help you advance progress towards accomplishing those goals that are currently challenges. So who can I have a conversation with and listen to? Maybe I can do it as a team. Maybe there's people I want to one-on-one meet with and use these skills with. But I think you'll get more out of it if you try to apply this to 1 or 2 specific problems that you have right now. All right. So when we think about this definition of leadership, leadership is one of the oldest topics that's been discussed in the organizational sciences. It goes back to the late 1800s. More data was collected in the early 1900s when World War I started, and we were trying to categorize military personnel into different units and different leadership positions, but that's sort of a different story. And through this progress, you kind of have an idea of when I say leader, certain characteristics come to mind, right? One way to view the human brain is as this categorization system, because we don't have enough processing power to take in all the stimuli and all the data that are around us at all times. So we create categories. And leadership has a category too. So if I ask you to just think of a leader, right? What type of characteristics does a leader have that's going to help you overcome these challenges? So what I will say is this perception is cultural. It comes from the environment that you sort of act within, and it is changing. But traditionally, when you think of a leader, if I say think of a leader and you're picturing someone in your mind, it's more likely to be someone who is dominant, right? They're telling people what to do. They have a plan and they're telling people how to execute that plan. They want to win. They can be aggressive at times, right? There's also some positive qualities, like they're courageous. They go above and beyond. They're stoic under pressure. All of these things that honestly are traditionally more masculine qualities. And generally they're low on things like when you think of a leader, you wouldn't necessarily say like, oh yeah, I'm thinking of someone who's gentle, kind, sensitive. You might think of another role for that person, but those things don't usually fit the stereotype of leader. So what happens is because people have this categorization in their mind, the people that become leaders in teams and organizations tend to be a lot high on these more traditional traits and low on others. And what I'm going to argue today is this has actually hurt our ability to collectively solve problems because the skills on the right that we tend to not think of as necessarily associated with being a leader, those are actually really important for creating collective motivation, helping people calm down and understand problems and talk to each other and combine their information, which is the purpose of a team, right? The reason you have a team is because you all have different resources that you can combine to create an outcome that's greater than any of you could have created alone. If someone could have done the task alone, there's a real question as to whether there even should be a team in the first place. And I go into this a lot more in my class at UD. So if you want to get really into this, come get your MBA here at UD. So anyway, so one way to think about this is that I like is if we go back here just for 1 second, and I want you to think about a leader that you've had in your life that fits both of these categories. And I can do this pretty easily. I used to play sports a lot, so there was a lot of leaders that were on this left side here. And I also had some teachers that were higher on this right side and some people I was closer to. And I want you to think about an example of these leaders. And I want you to think about who you were more willing to go above and beyond for, right? Who are you more willing to go above and beyond for? Who really motivated you? Who made you feel purpose? And this purpose is really important because, especially in creative tasks and innovative tasks that you all are completing, having this, what we call intrinsic motivation, having this desire to actually do the task is going to predict whether or not you put in extra effort and whether your mind is in a state to combine ideas and actually be creative. So one way that I like to talk about this, I stole this metaphor from a professor at NYU called Jonathan Haidt, and he talks about motivation as this idea of the elephant and the rider. And the rider is your conscious brain. So the rider is telling you what you know to be correct. So like, I shouldn't eat that brownie. I should eat the salad, or I really shouldn't do this thing, but I need to do this. Now, the elephant is your emotional self. It's what you want. It's what you desire. It's, you know, and the thing about the elephant and the rider is you can fight, you can try to have the rider direct the elephant as much as you want. You can tell yourself as much as you want, like, I should eat that salad, I shouldn't eat that brownie. But if the elephant really wants the brownie, the elephant's going to go get the brownie. So you really need to figure out, like, the rider can't control it. It's so much bigger. So you really need to figure out a way to get people on board with what they're doing. And what we're going to talk about, why listening is so key to this, is because what listening does is it allows people to talk through a problem themselves, and they actually figure out a solution for themselves of how to execute this task. So you've probably seen this on social media where you have people arguing about political issues or other issues, whatever it is, and it never really works to yell at somebody. It doesn't matter how logical you are, because what they're arguing with isn't their logical brain, it's the elephant, it's their emotion, right? They want to feel okay about it. They want to feel safe. So it's much better to allow people to come up with their own solutions. And if they come up with it themselves, if you're leading them in the right direction, they come up with it themselves, they're much more likely to follow through. And we've actually known about this for a long time. So there was two schools, Ohio State and Michigan. And if you're not from the US, you might not know about this, but if you are from the US, you know, if you know anything about them, they are rivals. They're a big rivalry. So if they both did some scientific work and they found the same thing, we should probably believe them. And they actually started studying what makes a good leader in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And they did focus groups, they did survey work, they did a few probably not sufficiently sampled experiments, but they had a lot of evidence, and they basically both found the same thing. Now, they called it something different, right? Because in science, if you come up with the same thing that already came up with, they want to differentiate themselves. So they wanted to have like the Ohio State system and the Michigan system. But if you look at it, it was actually the same thing. And what they found was that there was two behaviors that were really key to being an effective leader. And the first one is kind of what you think of as someone who's an effective leader. It's initiating structure. So you need to define the task. You need to tell people what roles they have. You need to set the goal for the team and let them know what they're trying to, engage. You can also dictate the process to a certain degree. If we had a little bit longer, I could explain why giving the team more autonomy to actually figure out the process kind of functions similarly to listening, and that they figure it out. They run into issues because you didn't tell them exactly what to do, but they're able to kind of work through those issues, and it makes them stronger in the future. Sort of like how helicopter parenting doesn't really help children that much because they don't figure out how to deal with conflict. And then they get to college and there's all this, people disagree with them and they're like, what's going on? No one's ever disagreed with me before. That's kind of like micromanaging a team. So anyway, initiating structure, you want to assign roles, you want to let them know what the goal is, you might want to give them a little bit of process. But the other important thing that we've actually known about since the 1960s, which got really pushed to the back burner during the 1980s and early 1990s, was consideration. So good leaders, what they do is they build trust with people. They respect people's ideas. They have regard for their feelings, right? A simple way I like to think about it is they treat them like humans, like your mom would want you to treat someone, right? That's how they treat people. And we've known this has been effective for leadership. All right. So what I want to do, and you can think about the way, again, your teams are currently working, is part of my goal as a professor, as a teacher, is to try to attack this stereotype of leadership and get people to understand that dominant leaders are probably not going to be as effective as considerate leaders in most cases. Now, there's going to be situations if you're in a military environment and you're boots on the ground and you have to make really quick decisions in a life and death scenario, there might not be a lot of room for creativity and innovation in that particular circumstance. So dominance might work in these edge cases. But overall, especially in the knowledge work that we're all doing, especially when things need to be creative and innovative and you're trying to push forward, considerate leadership is going to be a whole lot better. So with that being said, let me push forward into active listening. And I'm going to start this with a story. So this happened to a friend of mine, not myself. And this was the guy in grad school who he always worked. He was always in the office. And you might know people like this. You might be this person. So we would come in the morning. He would be there at 9 o'clock. We'd leave. He would be there 5, 6. He wouldn't come out with us to the pub. He wouldn't do anything. So he got a good job. He got a job at NYU as a business faculty member. And as I'm sure you're all aware, being a faculty after 6 years or 7 or 8 at some places, you either go up for tenure or you get fired. So there's a lot of pressure. Now, if any of you have been to NYU, what you'll know is that the business school is directly across from faculty housing. So you could literally see his office from his apartment. This is not a good situation for someone like this. So what he would do is he would work 8:30 after his kids got off to school until about 5:30, go home for dinner till about 7:30, till his kids, they were young at the time, till they were going to bed, then go back and work from 8 until 10 or 11 at night, and repeat, repeat, repeat. So one day he was looking at his computer screen and it was fuzzy. It was blurry. And he kind of looked away for a second. He looks back, it was still blurry. So he stood up, he was feeling a little bit dizzy. He's kind of like, I think I need to go for a walk. So he goes down the stairs, crosses the courtyard over to his apartment building. And in the lobby, he collapses. And the next thing he remembers, he's in the hospital. Now, apparently what happened is, if you live in New York, my first job was at Fordham, so I'm familiar with New York. There's a doorman, and the doorman called 911. His wife called the apartment. His wife was there. She came down, got in the ambulance. And when he woke up in the hospital, what they told him was, you didn't have a heart attack, but what you had was, on a scale of 1 to 10, you basically had a 10 out of 10 panic attack. Okay, so afterwards, what happens, right? He starts talking to people, and the conversation always has the same pattern. And you might have had this conversation with people, right? He'll be like, this happened to me, and people will be like, yeah, man, you shouldn't work so much. And like, I know, I shouldn't work so much. Oh, yeah, it's bad for your health, whatever, and it goes back and forth. What happens? Nothing, right? This conversation was effectively useless because he was just saying what he already knew. They were saying what he already knew. There is no solutions here. So 6 months later, the same thing happens again. This time he took a cab to the hospital, because if you live in the US, you know that we have to pay a lot for ambulances. And nothing changed. And nothing changed until he sat down with one of our mutual friends, who wasn't me. And she actually, instead of saying like, man, you shouldn't work so much, she was just like, talk a little more about that. And he's like, what? Because it's a little weird at first. He's like, what? And then he talked more about it. And she just got him to keep talking. And as he was talking, he realized, like, well, he does have these 2 little girls at home. He probably shouldn't be working so hard. Like, if something really serious happens, it's going to be a problem. And then he stopped. And again, it was because he actually talked himself through it, because someone took the time to active listen. So what active listening is you're with someone. It could be one-on-one or as a group, but it's very effective one-on-one. You're attending to the person. You're understanding them, but you are not judging them. This is very important, right? Even with your body language, you're not judging them. You're not rolling your eyes. You're not shutting down like this. You're not doing anything. You're just listening, okay? And you're trying to get them to talk. So just at the bottom there, what you're really doing is you are being quiet enough to give them the time and space so that they can discover what they're truly thinking. So what this means is, if we're talking about my friend there, say your uncle had a heart attack because he worked too much. You are not going to interject that story because that is taking over their story. Your job as the active listener is to listen, to get them to keep talking, and to support. Even if you have the best story that just happened to you and it fits right in, so you know what to do, you are not interjecting that. Okay? You're sitting back and you're listening. All right? All right. So you might be able to tell by the way I talk, but I'm from New York. So when my friend first told me this story, I was kind of like, I don't believe this. This is too wishy-washy for me. You know, I don't think this works. So me and my wife have been having this conversation for a long time. She was deciding whether or not she wanted to work at University of Delaware or stay where she was at Westchester University. We were having this talk for like 6 months in a row. And if any of you have partners and you've been talking about the same thing for 6 months in a row, you know, okay, we gotta end this. We gotta try something. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this active listening a shot. So the conversation came up as it had been like every week for the past few months. And instead of me just being aggressive as I usually am, I just literally tried what my friend said. And it sounded dumb, but I was just like, okay, talk more about that. And then it all came out. She talked through it for about 45 minutes. And she realized that she wanted to stay where she was, which even though it wasn't what I wanted, I was happy because I knew the conversation was finally over and she was happy because she talked about what she wanted and she figured out why she was thinking what she was thinking. All right, so these are just two stories that are anecdotes. Let me give you a little more data. I'm gonna start with one more anecdote. So this is Bell Labs, right? Probably had the most patents of any company in the last century. And what Bell Labs was trying to do is they undertook an internal study to try to figure out who had the most patents. So they had folders for every one of all the patents they had. They had thin folders and they had thick folders. And there were 7 or 8 guys, and they were all guys at the time, that had thick folders. And they wanted to figure out what's in common about these guys. Like, why are these guys producing more patents than the others? So they looked at everything. They looked at what schools they came from, what teams they were a part of, what their degrees were in, and they couldn't find any patterns. And what they figured out eventually is when these guys were stuck, they all had lunch with the same person, who was this guy, Harry Nyquist, who on his own had 138 patents. So he was doing pretty well. And what Harry was good at, as you might expect from this talk, was he was a good active listener. It wasn't that he was an expert in every field that these people were in. It was that when they were stuck, he knew how to ask them the right questions, and he wouldn't try to give them the answer. He would just let them think through it. So, you know, oh, have you thought about this? And then listening. Oh, what about this? And then listening. Now, there's also studies that have been done with larger scale data that show things like, maybe as you would expect, if you are a salesperson who's a better active listener, you sell more, you make more profit. If you are a detective who's a better active listener, suspects provide you more information. You know, this is one I really like. If you're a principal this was at elementary and high schools, and you listen better to the teachers more actively, it's not that the teachers do better, it's that the students do better. Supposedly because the teachers are able to talk through their problems and figure things out. Surgeons and primary care physicians that are better listeners get sued less. More data for the detective one. So you can see there's a wide variety of data kind of showing that active listening is beneficial. I forgot I put this in here. All right, we'll just digress for a second. All right. So when is active listening particularly helpful? And I'm going to broaden this a little bit and say not just active listening, but we were talking about before, you know, compassion, treating employees like human beings that you trust, that have lives that you listen to. Probably during COVID, right? A lot of companies during COVID had to make a lot of quick decisions. They had to innovate. They had to adapt very quickly. And what you find is that, so we have this measure, you probably see it, if you go to Wegmans, like I keep saying, I'm from New York, we have a Wegmans here in Delaware now, it's a grocery store, I'm finally happy that they have one. If you walk in the lobby, they will have this thing, like Fortune 100 best company to work for, right? I think Costco is another one that's a Fortune 100 best company. And the way they measure that is they literally interview employees, and they say things like, do you feel like your boss supports you? Do you feel like corporate supports you? Do you feel like if you have an idea, they'll listen to it and whatnot? These Russell 1000 and 3000 are just general market measures. It's kind of like the S&P 500, but a lot broader. And what you find here is after COVID, after this crisis, as you might imagine, companies that reported they were the best to work for, so our bosses support us, our company supports us, they rebounded much better, right? The rate of return, which is supposed to be the value of the company, even though nowadays that's not always the case, that's another lecture, but the value of the company is up about 17%. If you look over the long run, going back to 1998, there was a professor who invented a composite score. This isn't an actual thing you can buy. People ask me that. You'd have to like go in and do it yourself. But retroactively, he created a score which just put companies that were in the Fortune 100 and looked at it over time compared to the general market. And if you had taken this strategy starting in 1998, you would have had 3 times more returns than just investing in the general market. You would have had 17 times total return on your investment. So what I'm trying to do here is show you some data that shows that, okay, being the nice guy is nice, right? We all know being the nice guy is nice, it's ethical, it's the right thing to do. But if you're the type of leader where your employees can say like, oh, I trust this person supports me, this person will listen to my ideas, the companies do much better over long periods of time, right? And we also have those micro findings that we showed before. Now, the thing about it is, and this is just for business schools, this isn't for chemical engineering or hard sciences, but we have an accreditation called AACSB. This is all UD is it, Clemson is, all the top schools are AACSB accredited. And what they did is they looked at the syllabi of these business schools and they said, what are they teaching? What do these classes have? And you can see that 3/4 of the classes have some sort of presentation, which is pretty standard in business school. 22% had some sort of conversing. So these are like negotiation classes, leadership classes, things like this. 14% had none. And only 11% taught active listening. So then what these people did is they went into managers from the Fortune 500 companies and they said, okay, what are you hiring for? And the funny thing is the managers were the exact opposite. They said, what we want to hire really good listeners. We kind of already know how to do these things. We need people who are going to listen well. And they weren't even talking about active listening in this case, just any type of listening. We need employees who are going to listen, they're going to comprehend what we're saying, and they're going to execute, right? That's what we want. So the point is, listening is very important. There's a lot of data that shows it's key to being a good leader. There's data here that shows it's mostly ignored in business schools. And I'm assuming when you guys think across your undergraduate and graduate experience, you would also say it's probably been mostly ignored in most of your classes. But it's actually really, really important. All right. So what can we do? All right. So I want you guys to think all the way back to half an hour ago when we started this. And think about those 2 issues that you came up with. It could be an issue with a specific coworker that's preventing you from collectively using that effort to reach that goal. It could be a broader issue with your team. And I want you to think about, now what would happen if I took that coworker or I took a member of that team? Usually in front of the whole team, it's more difficult because people are talking across each other. So usually meeting one-on-one is more important. So for example, I was doing some work with the CEO of Portland Health Clinic, which is a health group out in Portland, Oregon. And they're a practitioner-owned health service. So basically 48, I think maybe somewhere around 50 doctors own the hospital and everything. And when the new CEO came in, he actually did a listening tour with all of the doctors that were part owners. He set up 45-minute meetings with each one of them. He took notes, and his job was not to talk. And he came from outside the healthcare industry, and the reason they hired him was actually because he was a considerate leader. So my point is you might have to meet one-on-one with more than one person. But I want you to think about the team that you're in. Who listening to is going to be important. who really needs to figure out how they need to get their work done, or who needs to figure out why they're doing this particular project. And then what you can do is you can meet with them. Again, you probably want to schedule at least half an hour, I would say, probably 45 minutes is better. And you're going to sit them down. You're going to ask them the question, like, you know, what did you think about that decision we made last week? Where do you think this project needs to go? What is the thing that is preventing you the most from getting your work done? Whatever it is. And you're going to let them talk, and you're going to focus on them. You're going to focus on what they're saying. Okay? You are not going to take over the narrative. So it might be someone that is newer to the team than you. It might be a younger student. It might be a younger researcher. That's okay. You know more than them because you've been there longer, but that's okay. You're going to let them talk. You're not going to take over. And if you want, you can do a debrief afterward, right? You can do a short 5-minute debrief and say, you know, I heard what you said. I've had this situation before. Here's what I think you should do. Or not what I think you should do, but probably more like, here's some advice that I would like you to consider. But that's after. You want to get the active listening done first. So you're not going to take over the narrative. All right. Your job, again, is to help them figure out a solution for themselves. Because if they figure it out for themselves and it clicks in their brain, they will do it. That is moving the elephant. They will actually do that thing. And your job is to get them to do that thing so that your team as a whole can function more efficiently. Right? Sometimes that's your job as the leader. Again, is to sit back and listen and let other people figure out what will work for them. I'm just thinking like a lot of, so you can probably think of a lot of stories in the news recently where leaders haven't been doing this, right? Where companies do back to work and they just top down, or like we're going like Amazon, right? Top down, we're going back to work. We're not doing remote anymore. Now, I would suggest, and this data would suggest, that is not the best strategy. It would be better to sit down with key stakeholders, listen to their concerns, and have them kind of come up with something that might work for them, and then maybe do a town hall or a survey to get feedback and try to get people bought in, because people aren't going to buy in if you do that. All right, but anyway, you're focusing on them. You're not taking over the narrative. You're focused on helping them. And again, as a reminder, this might be uncomfortable because we have very strong norms of conversation, and norms are very strong in general. So like when you go into a classroom, you sit down on the first day and you have a seat. And then the second day, you're very likely to sit in that same seat. Why? There's nothing special about that seat. The only thing is you already sat there and it's something your brain doesn't have to think about that day, right? So with conversation, we have norms as well. And the norm is like, I talk and then you talk and then I talk and then you talk. So when I teach this in class, and something you can try to practice maybe when you go home, maybe with one of your friends or your significant other, is try to just let them talk for 3 minutes uninterrupted. And it's going to feel like a long time because we're not used to really talking for more than 10, 20 seconds, maybe like 30 or 40 seconds at the most. If someone's like really like, you know, like I was saying before, you're out at happy hour and someone just gets on something and they're going, even that's not going to usually be more than like a minute. So try to sit down with someone, just have them talk to you for 3 minutes. Try really hard not to interrupt because practice makes perfect. And then you'll get more comfortable with it over time. You'll get more comfortable kind of sitting in the background, listening more, letting other people solve their problems. There probably are some other sub things I can get into, but I'm going to stop there for now. We have about 20 minutes left. And the reason I'm stopping is because I want to hear your guys' questions. So you can put questions into the Q&A. Sai will read your questions and I'll do my best to answer them, because I think this is really meant to be more of an interactive exercise. So if you guys have any specific questions for me, this is my email here. And beside that, please put any questions you have into the chat.